formal, kind of information sharing, checking in. As you've heard, the meeting is being recorded, but again, it's just for kind of information sharing in case anyone isn't able to attend some or all of today's discussion. In case I haven't met some of you, my name's Gretta Fitzgerald. I'm the interim head of the International Advocacy team with Concern Worldwide, and working closely with Laura Heraty on all things related to nutrition and nutrition for growth advocacy within Concern. Today, the objectives of today's session really is to debrief and kind of take stock of everything that went on around nutrition for growth. It's following on from the roundtable we would have had in January with Judith from Public Good, and some of you would have been involved in our panel discussion and engagement with Irish Aid on that. Hopefully today we'll be able to look at maybe some potential next steps for some or all of us here today in our respective organisations, and explore some linkages between different kind of milestone moments that will be happening this year. For example, the Food System Summit, or if it's FFD, the G20 is another opportunity that's come up, or COP30. So if you want to skip on to the next slide, Amy. Laura Heraty will give a quick overview of N4G for those of you that weren't tuned in closely to the running order of Nutrition for Growth, and give some reflections on that. Hopefully Paul Troy from Irish Aid will be able to join us and give some reflections from the Irish Aid perspective. Margarita Dacquino from Generation Nutrition will speak a little bit on the EU nutrition commitments and kind of what that might look like in the next few years. And we're also joined by Breda Gavin Smith, who's working with Eleanor Crook Foundation, and will give some insights from Eleanor Crook from Nutrition for Growth. There'll be time then just to kind of open it up and have a chat. If others would like to add about their participation in Nutrition for Growth, maybe some commitments that were made by different organisations. And then we'll move on to exploring opportunities. So we have Professor Charles Spillane from IFIAD that will be able to kind of speak to the more food systems perspective on it. And Judith then again from Ideas and Actions for Public Good, who would have worked on the report with us, the best that Ireland can be for nutrition. So it'd be good to get some after perspectives on that. And then Tom Arnold, then chair of the Irish Africa Rural Development Committee, I think will be able to speak as well. So that's it. It's jam-packed. I'll stop talking now and I'll hand over to Laura, who will be able to talk through some of the commitments from Nutrition for Growth.
Super. Thanks, Greta. I might move a bit quick through this, but a full overview of financial commitments is not yet available. However, there has been an extensive N4G summit statement released, and this is compiled prior to the summit of the commitments that were made. So it's a preliminary snapshot. And what it details is that 403 commitments were made by 127 commitment makers across 66 countries, and accounting to approximately 25.7 billion in pledges. Official and final commitments will be made available through the Nutrition Accountability Framework and the GNR, and I think the deadline for the final submission of commitments is set for June. The commitments were developed across 6 thematics as per the commitment guides that were developed. So we had health, and we can just observe from this infographic that health and social protection emerged as the leading theme in terms of number of commitments that were made to that thematic. Although just important to note that it's multi-sectorial, so there's a very broad range of interventions here. So it's quite multi-sectorial in itself, so it's not so surprising. Next slide, please. I will fly through this. This slide shows the composition of N4G commitments makers. So it's worth highlighting that traditional players continue to lead in making the commitments. And unfortunately, I don't have a comparative breakdown from the previous summit yet to compare between Tokyo and Paris. Next slide, please. So the major financial contributions by donors. So in previous summits, we had significant pledges made by, well, various donors, but this time around, of course, we were missing the US, and they did not send a delegation to Paris. The EU made a significant pledge, committing 3.4 billion from 2024 to 2027, and will prioritize tackling malnutrition in sub-Saharan Africa. And this consists of noteworthy contributions from member states. I won't go through that, but just to note that the United Kingdom did not make any financial or policy commitment or registered in the Nutrition Accountability Framework. However, they did announce the launch of the Global Nutrition Compact, and I will touch a little bit on this later. And then this year's summit also saw stronger presence from multilateral development banks. The African Development Bank announced a commitment of over 9 billion. The World Bank pledged 5 billion. And the Asian Development Bank is expected to announce a full commitment or a financial pledge. But this will be in the upcoming annual meeting in Milan. But at N4G, they did announce a partnership with Nutrition International. I won't go into the philanthropic and private foundations. Maybe Breda will touch on this in the next segment. Next slide, please. The summit also offered a moment for collective action, and through that, a number of call for actions were initiated. The first, the Global Compact for Nutrition, which I mentioned was launched by the UK, which the Irish government and Concern have signed on to. And it represents a new commitment to embed nutrition across sectors not traditionally seen as nutrition specific, including economic growth, productivity, trade, and climate. And it builds really on the SUN countries that have been championing nutrition through multi-sectorial approaches. Then we have the Civil Society Declaration. So it was endorsed by over 100 organizations and youth groups, and basically a universal access to good food, or to good nutrition, apologies. There was also a call to action issued by Stand Up for Nutrition and the Micronutrient Forum in response to funding cuts in the EU and in the US. And then finally, the Paris Declaration on Business and Nutrition. And just together, these reflect broadening nutrition agendas. I will link, they're all linked, the specific details at the end of the presentation to each of these calls for more details. Next slide, please. So now post some of the reflections. We have an overview of the pledges that were made, the range of actors, but maybe the important question remains is what of these commitments are actually new? And then commitments will be formed. So we're waiting for this accountability and monitoring through the NAF. We also know that nutrition for growth outcomes don't stand in isolation. They align with major global efforts. So the World Health Assembly, the extension of the global nutrition targets and the conclusion to extend the UN Decade of Nutrition to 2030. We will also have UN Food System Summit, of course, and the SUN Global Gathering. So continued momentum, and also around the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty too, which will be launched in Brazil. So just kind of that will keep momentum and advocacy efforts aligned too. I will stop there and hand back to Greta.
Great, thanks, Laura. And I see a question in the chat that we might hold off on until later, but be great to hand over to Paul Troy, our development specialist from Irish Aid, who would have been kind of key in Ireland's engagement on nutrition for growth. Paul, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So I'll give thanks, Laura, for the intro and what the overview you've presented. Just to update, the Sun Global Gathering in November is postponed. It will no longer happen. Actually, that was a decision by their ExCom earlier this week, I think, or late last week, for a variety of reasons. And we did hear from the French Team France earlier this week. There was a very, very low-key US presence at N4G, although not formal. So they were there, and they had 11 billion at Tokyo, but nothing this year. But yes, there was a US presence of some description, albeit not formal, at N4G, which was news to us on earlier this week. So from our perspective, we believe that the summit was a success in the fact that it exceeded expectations, understanding the current geopolitical climate, particularly from January onwards. So expectations were a little bit low leading into the summit, but they were superseded. It did deliver on its principal objective, really, to place nutrition on the political agenda and to try and integrate it across sustainable development. Obviously, we believe this is a continuous process and has to be acted on. The summit itself is just a static point, so we have to take this forward. We do believe the success of the summit was a testament to the Special Envoy, Briac Pont, and his team, and to the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, who really mobilized extensive country participation and some really amazing commitments by many countries, such as Sierra Leone, Bangladesh, and many others. We were very proud to welcome the European Commission's pledge, which was greater than its previous Tokyo pledge. And we really appreciate their mobilizing Team Europe approach overall. As I said, we believe it was a success. We had engaged, like many others, on a number of fronts. We had engaged with yourselves. We had our own preparation for N4G to develop our own policy pledges. We also supported GAIN in a short. We're supporters of them all the time, but we supported them specifically to help Team France in their engagement with the multi MDBs. So we had a short support, additional support there. We also engaged with 4SD and World Vision on the nutrition dialogues, which were 400 dialogues in 54 countries. The synthesis, which we would recommend anyone to read as we implement our pledges. From the civil society perspective, we thought the two-day pavilion was really great. It kind of galvanized and mobilized civil society at a time when things, as we know, are not so easy to motivate. So that was really good. There was a wide array of side events. One of the disadvantages of some of the side events were they were so geographically remote, so it was very, very hard to capture them all. Even with a presence, we had 4 delegates in attendance. You're aware of our pledge, our financial pledge. In addition to that financial pledge, we have dedicated funding for child wasting as a part and parcel of that pledge from 2026 to 2029. So 4 years of which will be hammered out, I suppose, before it starts in 2026, but we have dedicated funding for child wasting, building on our current. And we also had 2 other policy pledges. We had a policy pledge on food systems and climate, to use our advocacy and influence in advocating for healthy diets in the various multi-fora processes and policies at global and at national level. And we also had a pledge then for social protection, that we would advocate we would become champions of social protection, nutrition sensitive social protection. And we have that commitment also, which has been just recently uploaded on the NAF accountability framework. And one of our other pledges then was part and parcel of the nutrition integration, which aligns with what we do. But one of the thing is we have committed as part of our nutrition integration to keep our funding for SUN at this time for the next 4 years as they advance the nutrition integration agenda. And we would say that over 50 have committed to the nutrition compact presently. We're very keen that it's not another duplication of processes or so on and so forth. And while FCEO were leading this was fully backed by SUN, left, right and centre, and would not have happened had it not been for SUN in mobilising and taking it forward. So there are pledges. We had 5 in total. Yes, and they're all uploaded now to the NAF, and they will be in the next iteration of the GNR report. Despite the success, we would be very aware that civil society did very much clearly and robustly articulate the challenge in achieving the global nutrition goals given the prevailing aid cuts. And we did note the report in Nature that was published during the summit for warning the catastrophic effects of the cuts. And we see this ourselves. With our child wasting program, we're being asked to reallocate funding for the purchase of our UTF. We know that USAID was a major supplier of it, and we, as members of the Action Review Panel on child wasting, we are talking to UNICEF in this regard, and they'll give us some sort of a mapping exercise on the challenges faced. Going forward, going forward, we will work with our Team Europe approach. We had a meeting of hearts during the week. We will work with Team Europe to try and harmonise and synchronise on implementing our pledges. We'll continue to advocate for nutrition. We're aware of the upcoming events this year. More importantly, we're very much aware. We're building on the extension of the Decade of Resolution, and as you know, Ireland with Ethiopia is leading the resolution on extending the global nutrition targets, and the final negotiation is planned for the week after next as we agree the operational targets among member states. So far I think we have 30 co-sponsors. We haven't got a great support from the Global North, but we have resounding support from the Global South on this. We note the significant commitments of philanthropy, and we are willing to explore options going forward. As we say, we note particularly the announcement towards the Child Nutrition Fund that every dollar would be matched, but up to 500 million. We're acutely aware of that. And as we say, some of the philanthropy, it is focused on products and specific interventions, but as we say, we are very much into the systems, and our resolution on extending the global nutrition targets does call for domestic funding to strengthen systems so that nutrition is incorporated. Essential nutrition actions is incorporated at community and primary healthcare level. So yeah, that's our kind of take on it. One final thing would be that we do support the Global Nutrition Report. It hasn't received its full funding, we don't think, for this year, but we would look at the other key donors to see, and the stakeholder group, how this can be strengthened really in terms of the nutrition accountability framework going forward, because this is really the start of the race. The pledges have been made tracking and tracing accountability. So we are on that stakeholder group as part of the Global Nutrition Report, and would work to ensure accountability going forward. So yeah, that's my overview of N4G. Paris, happy to respond to questions as necessary.
Brilliant. Thanks a million for that, Paul. Really great to hear some more details on those pledges and all the complementary activities going on. So I'll keep things moving, and I'll hand over to Margarita from Generation Nutrition.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So a little introduction on who we are. So Generation Nutrition is an informal coalition of 7 INGOs. We are based in Brussels, and we conduct advocacy towards EU institutions, so the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council of the EU. And we focus on advancing nutrition advocacy. So I wanted to give you also a bit of a background before talking about our engagement at N4G and our analysis of the European Commission pledge. So what have we been doing to prepare the summit? So our goal was to have ambitious political and financial pledge at N4G from the EU institutions. Financially, we were hoping in something like Tokyo. So we were happily surprised from the pledge that was higher, as Paul mentioned. And politically, we wanted to have a EU that commits again to nutrition and renews its policy framework for nutrition. So the European Commission has a policy framework that was adopted in 2013, will end this year. And unfortunately, there has not been for yet a pledge to update this policy framework. So in the last year, the context of our advocacy was that we had a new EU leadership. So in the last year, we had the European Parliament elections, which meant also a new college of commissioners, so a new EU leadership. Not really new, it's still von der Leyen, but new personalities in the lead of two commissions that are directorates that are really important, the one on humanitarian aid and the one on international development cooperation. Financially, we were in a context of limited resources, obviously, with member states of the budget going down, but also the EU Commission budget being cut down, in particular during the midterm review that happened last year of the multi-annual financial framework, which is the EU Commission long-term budget, 7-year long budget. 2 billion were redirected from development cooperation towards migration management. So we've seen cuts also from the European Commission. And most importantly, last year and this year, we are going towards the end of the current EU budget cycle, which means that the resources that the European Commission was able to pledge in Paris were the end of the current multi-annual financial framework. So how did we navigate this context? We had different tactics. So as I mentioned, we are an informal coalition. So we don't have massive advocacy and lobbying budgets. We don't have enormous human resources. And we don't have communication leverage. So we cannot do big communication campaigns, etc. So we focused really on advocacy, bilateral, institutional advocacy, lobbying, etc. We engaged with all 3 big institutions of the European Union. The idea was to, in particular, have a Council of the European Union, so the member states, and European Parliament that could be vocal and could be the spokesperson for civil society's recommendations. And it kind of worked also because member states like Ireland were very active. And the council was able to adopt last year during the Hungarian presidency of the council some council conclusions, so where the member states come together and say that they commit to nutrition and food security, and they mentioned the N4G summit and the need to both have financial and political pledge with the potential review and update of the action plan for nutrition. So this was a strong push that we could use then with the European Commission. And on the other side, we really worked to have the European Parliament involved in the summit. So originally, the European Parliament was not to be involved. N4G was kind of being, it was not really on the agenda of the committee that takes care of development and humanitarian aid. And so we were really able to have champions, members of European Parliament, in particular Barry Andrews, who is the chair of the DEVE committee. And they really engaged the European Parliament, that was a bit the vocal champion for nutrition, and pushed the Commission to make pledges. We had also some external advocacy with the resources that we had. We tried to use as much as possible member states. So we had, for example, last year, 2 high-level events hosted by France, the French permanent representation in Brussels, then by Germany. And then we had a global call to actions towards the EU leadership. So we're talking about von der Leyen, the President of the European Parliament, Metsola, and the President of the Council, Costa. And then the idea was really to build strong alliances with other civil society organizations, but also UN agencies here in Brussels, and have some kind of joint advocacies and intel sharing, etc. So as I mentioned, the key timeline was to first influence the Council conclusions, so that on the member states there would be a push towards Commission pledge. Then mobilize the European Parliament, and that's what we did. And we were also able to secure a delegation to the summit. So 4 MEPs came to the summit. And then we really wanted the EU commissioners, both the international partnership Sikela and the humanitarian one, Labib, to join the summit, to really show that political leadership was behind it. The humanitarian aid one joined. Unfortunately, the international partnership didn't, but still it showed support. Next slide. So at N4G, we had our coalition engagement, but you must keep in mind that we're also individual ambassadors of our own organization. So each one of us was working also on side events and stuff that was organized with our own organizations. But as coalition, we had prepared a policy brief focusing on Team Europe engagement. We disseminated it. We had obviously a side event organized with the European Parliament in Paris, with also the presence of the European Commission, Ireland, and other key stakeholders like parliamentarians from Tanzania, etc. And the focus was really on crisis and nutrition in crisis, and how to sustain action, both financially and politically. And it came at a unfortunately good moment because of the disengagement of the US government and FCDO. It was really important to call the EU in its also humanitarian engagement. Our take on N4G overall, we're happy about the European Commission pledge. It was more than what we thought they would be able to engage. So it is a good and positive signal for the nutrition community. However, there are several points that need clarification, and I will quickly share in the chat also the full analysis that we have. The first thing is that this budget risk, there is a big risk of dilution of nutrition objectives because the 3.4 billion committed by the European Commission, they are nutrition sensitive, and for now there is no indication on how much nutrition will be actually prioritized and in which sectors. The other thing is that there are 2 big gaps that we have identified. The first one is that there is no programming target, which means that there is no going to be an impact assessment. These money don't have a programming objective, which is different from previous commitments that were guided by the programming commitment of the European Commission to reduce stunting of 7 million children. So for us, it's really important that the EU works now to define what is the goal with this money. And then the other thing that is missing is the political commitment. So for now, they have allocated resources just until 2027, which is the end of the current budget of the European Commission. But the negotiations for the next EU budget that will run until 2035 are happening now, and we're missing the policy document to defend budget allocation for nutrition in the next budget, which is really dangerous because the European Commission has a new agenda for international development, which is very much on self-interest and mutually beneficial agenda. So defending nutrition will be hard, and it would be very useful to have a programming commitment and a policy framework to help us advocate for nutrition budgets. And I end here.
Thank you very much, Margarita. Great to hear from you and all the work that Generation Nutrition has been doing over the past few years, leading up to this, and I'm sure picking up now afterwards, to follow up on those commitments. So I'll hand over to Breda Gavin Smith from Eleanor Crook Foundation. Breda, are you there?
Yes, Greta, I'm here.
Great.
Great. Thank you, Greta. Yeah, and thank you to Laura and the rest of the team at Concern for organising this really important reflection really quickly after N4G, because it's always really nice to do it soon after you've had the event. Otherwise, you lose a lot of the momentum. Also really interested to hear, Margarita, your gaps, which are also something that we're talking a lot about internally, particularly on this programming target. So we also noted the same key gaps. So good to have you mentioned that and to take that up again later. I think most of you know Eleanor Crook. We're a foundation based in the US, and we scale solutions to malnutrition by investing in research, policy analysis, and advocacy. And so I guess I'm really talking more from the foundation space and what we heard from foundations at N4G. I think the first thing to say was there was strong collaboration and momentum across the events that we were involved in, and the pledges, particularly coming from the foundation space. Many of you here on the call were at our MMS side event, and at that event, the Eleanor Crook Foundation committed 50 million, alongside 200 million from SIF, the Gates Foundation, and also Kirk Humanitarian, to scale up one of the most cost-effective interventions that we know about in global health, and that's multiple micronutrient supplements. And this supports the 1 billion roadmap that was developed last year with the Gates Foundation to ensure global access to MMS for pregnant women, no matter where they live. We were also involved in the wasting treatment sessions that were held at N4G, and supported UNICEF's presence at the N4G village, which was also a really great addition this year to the N4G event, albeit that Paul's comment around the geographical challenges was also something that we noted as well. Trying to get to everything was quite difficult. The Stronger Foundations event also, I think, really marked a turning point on the catalytic role of philanthropy in global nutrition. We saw the Bezos family pledge 500 million to UNICEF, which Paul already has mentioned, to the Child Nutrition Fund, and also with some support from SIF and also the Gates Foundation. I think also maybe Laura briefly touched on it as well, which was really of note and significant, I think, is this the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank's pledge of 5 billion and 9.5 billion to nutrition through 2030. And this really shows a growing recognition that nutrition is a critical investment in economic development. And certainly this is something that we need to really hone in on a lot more, I think, for nutrition, is this economic development and its role in human capital. And then lastly, integration of immunization and nutrition also was a key focus throughout N4G, mainly through Gavi's role. Next slide, please. Maybe some very quick reflections. I think it was a good moment to not forget that every 11 seconds, a child dies from basic nutrition. And really, in the kind of growing challenges we have at the moment, really not to forget that. And it reminded us also that we don't need magic. You know, we just need to focus, and we also need evidence-based action in what we do. We need to meet policymakers where they are, sharpening our arguments, and direct funding where we know that the evidence is strongest, particularly for children and women. And certainly in tighter budget times, investing in high impact, cost-effective interventions is key. It's also true that while philanthropy can't replace public aid, we can see that they can also have a catalytic effect when used strategically. Thanks, Greta.
Super. Thanks a million, Breda. Some really great highlights there coming from the philanthropic side of the house. Great. We're running a little bit behind in time, but does anyone want to kind of jump in with questions or any additions before we move on to the next segment? No, I don't see any hands raised or any
Gretta,
kind of
this
mics
is
going on
Charlie.
here.
Charlie, can I ask a question? Sorry, I can't come out
Yes,
to raise my.
Charlie.
So
Go for
I
it.
had two questions. One of to the colleague in the NGO coalition in Brussels. So the Global Gateway, is there any kind of indication of what its intersection is with the nutrition agenda? The EU Global Gateway.
That's a really good question because it's something that we're also questioning. So the Global Gateway has 5 priority topics, and probably also Paul will be able to explain further. But and food security and nutrition are not in these 5 priority topics. Food security and food system transformation is included in the green transition envelope, let's say. And now what the European Commission nutrition team is trying to do is find projects in nutrition that can be branded as Global Gateway, and that can be one of the sectors in which investments can be mobilized, that can be scalable, etc. What is important to say about Global Gateway is that first, when we talk about Global Gateway, it creates a bit of confusion because on one side, there is the Global Gateway hard infrastructure and the investment idea. So to really use public money to blend finance and or guarantee, etc., and have a private investment in it. But then the European Commission now also has this Global Gateway branding 360 approach, where everything is a bit considered as Global Gateway. So when it comes to the investment side, the European Commission is working on that. For now, we don't have info on what exactly they are working on. It will be important to see if in the upcoming agricultural ministerial conference of the EU and African Union member states and the upcoming summit that will happen at the end of the year, there's going to be some kind of detailed investment when it comes to food and nutrition security. We want to bring food and nutrition security on the agenda, but still to be checked how a Global Gateway can be mobilized. And Antonia is also there, so go.
Oh, Antonia, you're on mute.
Sorry, is it okay that I jump in then, Gretta?
Yeah, just a quick point.
A super quick point. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that 2 things I wanted to mention about Global Gateway. One, I think one of the reasons we understand from the Commission that they were able to successfully get this pledge, although let's keep the point about the fact that it's not still fully transparent where all of it's coming from and how it will be used, was in fact this very strong case about the the kind of investment impact of nutrition investment. You know, we always say $1 spent, 23 back down the road in GDP. So I think this was, whatever you think of that, that was one of the most powerful arguments. But the other thing I wanted to raise was just the question about we did hear during the summit also that some of the grants that are still available for kind of creating the enabling environment for the Global Gateway are sometimes we've heard going to private sector organizations, and it's true that many of them are focusing in very specific areas like food fortification, and so we worry about some of the areas like public health strengthening, which are obviously much less amenable to private sector engagement. So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of transparency around the Global Gateway, which people in the Commission themselves will tell you is something that's being constructed on the ground. It's a PR strategy that's being constructed on the ground as we go. So I think that's something that's important to understand about it. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Antonia, and thanks, Margarita, for taking that. And I think we could have a whole session on the Global Gateway alone. Maris, your hand is up. I'm conscious of time and we have speakers lined up. and I want to make sure that they get their
No, go ahead that way, Greta. It's okay. I can come in later. There's no rush.
Yeah, I'll make sure to come back to you later. Thanks. So Charles, I'll hand over to you. Speaking on behalf of the of IFIAD. Great.
Okay, next slide. Yeah. So thanks everybody, and this is really a useful webinar, and so I'd like to thank on behalf of IFIAD everybody for inviting us to this. We've really just put together a range of kind of bullet points, and I'll kind of talk through them quickly because I realize we only have 5 minutes. Firstly, the pledges are very welcome, but I guess, you know, it speaks to one of the points made by others, is like how that investments will be spent. Really depends on what kind of impact. And so we'd have some questions around how to prioritize where to focus the investments and what the criteria would be, and based on that focusing. So we'd be really keen to hear from everybody here if there was a knowledge body on what types of investments pay off most and what work has been done to date. Then the other point we'd make is that we're really keen to see that in all development interventions and investments that there would be an embedded research and innovation component to try and improve the efficiency, effectiveness and impact of development interventions over time, so that ultimately they get better. That's not really within the programmatic cycles at present. They're separated, but they could be integrated. Then policies and activities that would enable access to and affordability of a healthy diet for all, that we see that as critical, and essentially then, you know, supported by agricultural systems that are sustainable based on evidence, basically. So what do we mean by sustainable in that context? Next slide. Then we'd also be keen to see a focus on the most nutritionally marginalized, and that's those obviously suffering from undernutrition, but also those who are suffering from overweight and obesity, and that expands across households, communities, and nations. We see the dietary transition pathways of every country as dictating what will ultimately be grown in the countryside. Rural areas will continue to feed urban areas, and so then in that context, diets are a sustainability and also an equity issue. We'd like to see a focus on nutrition and dietary interventions that focuses on both the undernutrition, but the dual burden of malnutrition. So to what extent the investment portfolio is distributed across both of those or integrates both of those rather than just being focused on one or the other. Next slide. There's a lot of work on value chains within food systems. And again, the value chain work to date, to what extent it addresses the question of affordability of food products for the end consumer. So if 3.1 billion people can't afford a healthy diet, then clearly the value chain work needs to kind of factor that into the work on value chains. And then we point to the question of the responsibility of government to regulate and promote evidence-based healthier foods and disincentivize unhealthy foods and beverages. And that includes all of the usual suspects here that we're very, very familiar with in the portfolio of foods that we all have access to, or many people have access to. And then the question of food environments. And again, we think there's quite a bit of work to do on both the understanding of concepts of food environments and also co-design of food environments. Again, there's a coherence question there. Food environments may mean different things to different people. Next slide. Then finishing up on, we see a need for co-design between both on the agriculture side for food supply planning, what the agricultural sector are producing, and what the public health planning in terms of what the public health system wants people to be eating and how they want to live their lives. And there's potential there for connection to the education system, but also for green skills development and rural jobs. School meals programs and educational curricula are pretty strategic entry points for intergeneration change in diets. And food safety is something that's emerging all of the time as a critical point for how food systems are changing, both perceptions of food safety being not great in wet markets and perhaps better in supermarkets, whether they're founded or unfounded, and in what extent they're changing the food systems, particularly in urban areas. Next slide. So last 3 points then. Resilience of food system to shocks we think is important, given kind of economic shocks, conflict shocks, climate shocks, so forth. It's not particularly well understood, and there's work to be done there. And again, investing in research and innovation, the data sets for decision making and technology capacity building are important. And then public-private partnerships, because much of the food system has a significant private sector component. So without that, it's not possible to shift. So I'll finish on the last 2 slides. Next slide. So our closing reflections and kind of next steps, I think the mandate was to look at what over the next year. We'd see potential, putting it out there basically, greater policy coherence at Ireland and EU level on climate, food systems and access to more sustainable, healthy and affordable foods. Is there an opportunity to use the upcoming EU president to promote a joint EU declaration on climate, food systems and healthy food for all ahead of COP30? And then, you know, is there potential to enable research partnerships between Irish research providing organisations, universities, Teagasc, and their counterparts in developing countries, which could be a mix of different types of funding, open design and challenge-based, with financing for both. We think there's opportunity there. Next slide. Then again, in a European sense, there's a deficit, let's say, in mechanisms to allow us to horizontally connect to cognate counterparts across Europe, and then in the South as well, to build consortia that are focused on nutrition for all. And then are there possibilities to showcase and promote Ireland's partnership activities on nutrition, diets and food systems at the G20 meetings and UNFSS +4 meeting in Addis in July? And then, you know, putting it out there, is there any possibility for an Ireland pavilion at COP30, which could help to showcase Ireland in partnerships with developing countries in climate change and food systems across all of the IFID members and beyond? So these are just kind of some thoughts, just kind of putting them in the mix.
Great, thanks, Charles. Some great kind of propositions there, and I especially like the diets are sustainability and equity issue. I think I'm going to take that line. So I'll hand over to Judith from Ideas and Action for Public Good. Are you there, Judith?
I am there. Thank you very much. Afternoon, everybody. I have 6 points. I'm going to be really quick. I'm also very grateful to Laura for saying at the beginning that the commitment statement that's been published is not complete, because I was going to start by outrage at the number of things that are missing. So I'm very grateful for not embarrassing myself, since we're obviously waiting for a lot of input to come in. However, having said that, if you go back to the first Nutrition for Growth in 2012-2013, where the purpose was clearly the name in the name, that it was about economics, it was about putting nutrition in the growth agenda at the same time as various growth initiatives were taking place in big institutions. So in that context, it is good to see that the economic impacts were significant at Nutrition for Growth, and in particular, the Paris Declaration relating to business, because business has been the elephant in the room in nutrition discussions. Clearly a massive, massive impact on food systems and access to affordable, nutritious food. And so it's good to see that. But I would be very interested to know who was there. So apart from nutritionists, what was the makeup of the participation of the summit? Were the departments of finance? What sort of businesses did we have on the commitment list compared to Tokyo or previous N4Gs? There are very few business entities, so it would be interesting to me to see that, and important, I think, for us to know who we're talking to. Second point related to this, I wonder whether we need to address the theory of change behind the way that we look at accountability for nutrition. So we've invested a huge amount in the quality of commitments, laborious processes, if I may say so, about the quality of commitments, and laborious processes about documenting and measuring what people actually committed to, which historically through my whole career I've thought is important. I wonder though whether we're spending too much time on that and not enough time on the politics, and whether we really need to take a long, hard look at whether that's a good mechanism for driving accountable commitments, accountable action, actually. I think it's noticeable how much attention there was to micronutrients compared to previous N4Gs, which I think is also interesting in terms of the points being made by Charlie, among others, about effective interventions. And the really encouraging thing, I thought, was the scale and increase in the commitments from ADB and World Bank, looking at much, much bigger commitments than they've made in the past, and substantial amounts of investment. However, last points. We have to see this in the context of the implosion of aid resources, the declining confidence in international cooperation as a mechanism for delivering change, and the impact particularly of the US cuts on health system funding in the poorest countries. So the big question is, what do we see as the next generation way of financing people at the margin, nutritionally marginal communities and those who are furthest behind? What is the process going to be? Do we see nutrition as a global public good? Do we see public health strengthening as a global public good? And if so, what are the financial instruments and mechanisms we need to fund it? Governments will need to borrow to invest in nutrition. So what is going to build confidence in investors to lend to them? And what is going to build confidence of those governments to feel that they can borrow for something that has a long-term return? So FFD is a vehicle for one of the few for seriously addressing those types of issues. So my plea would be that Ireland takes a very forward-looking stance at FFD and looks at nutrition in terms of global public goods and the new international, well, there isn't a new international architecture, but with a view to starting a serious conversation about a new international architecture. And nutrition is a really good example because it's politically intuitive and a priority and something that crosses so many sectors of the economy. So those were my few reflections from a non-participant of the summit. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Judith. We're coming up to the hour. We may go over, but I hope folks will be able to stay on. If not, thank you for joining. But yeah, I'll hand over to Tom, and then we'll do a quick Q&A and close after that. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Gretta. First, two preliminary remarks. Thanks to Concern for organising this extremely helpful webinar. And secondly, an acknowledgement of Paul's contribution at the beginning, the detail about what Ireland actually did and what happened at the summit, but particularly Ireland's contribution, which I think by any standards we should be proud of and welcome. The other thing is, I want to say, we've touched on it a bit in the two last comments from Charlie and from Judith. The need to look at N4G as the first of a series of important events over a series of years. So indeed, the 4 meetings, important meetings this year, but then the presidency, and I would say the looking towards the rethinking of the SDGs, the future of the SDGs. That's the sort of time frame and broad agenda that we should be looking at, and trying to bring consistency in our approach to that. And I particularly welcome Judith's comment there at the end of her contribution about how we should think about the financing for development study as a meeting later in July. I just want to, because of time, confine myself to 2 issues, the 2 important linked connections, linked events of this year, the Food System Summit +4 and COP30. And I think a central approach Ireland should be taking in respect of these 2 is to, insofar as possible, link both events, but also talk about the policy coherence dimension. Charlie mentioned this in his second last slide. This is really important. And I think we have an important story and a good story to tell here. Ireland has, in a sense, 2 corresponding national policies. We have Food Vision 2030 and we have the Climate Action Plan. And these, in a way, feed into what we should be advocating for at the UN Food System Summit and COP30. And the story to tell essentially is that we have, at the moment, we can legitimately talk about a coherent food system in Ireland from, if you like, from the beginning of the chain, where food safety, where we're really a world leader, through the whole question of the links between agriculture and the environment, through food loss and waste, the bioeconomy. That's the sort of broad agenda that Ireland can credibly talk about. I think there's a separate important dimension in that this meeting, the UN Food Systems, the Food System Summit +4, is being held in Africa, and I think we should be putting a clear emphasis on the fact that Africa is at a key moment in its evolution. It has developed the Kampala Declaration, which sets its own food and nutrition agenda for the next decade. Ireland was supportive in helping them do that, and I think we should very much support and do whatever we can to make sure this is one of the important outcomes of that meeting. The second meeting I want to briefly talk about is COP30. I was in Brazil in February talking to various people who are preparing it. I think there's very clear political priority been given to it. An important issue from an Irish point of view is that that the global alliance against hunger and poverty will be a key element of that. Now, Ireland has joined that alliance and should again be helping to frame whatever comes eventually at the meeting in November. The final political comment I want to make is we've seen in N4G that the world can get along without American money and policy input. It's very unfortunate that's there, but in fact, we have to take that as a reality for at least the next 4 years. But other leadership can emerge and has emerged in the case of the N4G and will emerge in the other meetings. So Ireland should be extremely conscious of making sure that it's helping to shape the agenda of whatever leadership emerges from these meetings, and I think it's very good at doing that. It did it in N4G, and I hope it can do it in the meetings to come. Thank you, Gretta.
Thank you very much, Donna. I think that was a great last words. I think to kind of sum up everything you've touched on quite a lot. I'm conscious of time. There's a question there in the chat from Paul. One very small mention of biofortified crops in the N4G statement from CGIAR. Should we read anything into this? Does this mean that biofortified crops are now conventional, in quotation, crops and no longer need to be mentioned? I do not have the expertise to answer that question. Does anyone with us maybe want to take a shot? I think maybe Paul, yourself.
No idea. I hope they're just conventional and they're just part of every, seed catalogs in every country. But I'd be really interested to know why there wasn't more said about this.
Yeah, one to watch, I think. We'll put it on our list. Morris, just to come back to you, Morris, if your hand raised earlier, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and it's kind of, Judith picked up on some of it, and I think I can't remember who else. It's more about the sort of ability to participate in these sorts of summits, because when we started talking to many of the countries we work in, they simply couldn't afford to attend the Paris Summit. And then a few that I engaged with while there were basically thrown a brief and thrown on a plane, I think, and arrived not fully aware. So maybe some of that came from the confusion of the setup of the summit, in that invitations went to foreign affairs when it's really a nutrition summit. So people didn't fully know where to go with it. But it comes to all the other events and summits we'll all go to throughout the year. Paul mentioned at the start, there was 4 Irish people there from the department, and they struggled to cover all the events. And you can imagine if you're a team of 1 from Vanuatu or Somalia, how do you actually meaningfully engage in a lot of these summits? Maybe that's something we need to look at as well, as sort of viewers on or participants of these summits, is how we support the participation, and we've done that with sort of government people already, but how do we also advocate for a broader participation and a more meaningful participation for these summits, and how that could come about. So yeah, just a thought around that.
Yeah, I think accessibility to these kind of events, they're important events, but then the accessibility piece, maybe with the rapidly shrinking budgets, we'll have to think more creatively about, as a community, how we engage. I can see people are dropping off. which is fine. And apologies for running over. Really value people's time and for people engaging. But is there anything else burning before I close?
Could I please come in for one question?
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Greta and Laura, for organizing this. This has been really useful, so thank you. But just building off what Maurice said there, I'm wondering if anyone has any insights into the format of stocktake in Addis and whether it might be similar to the N4G, so where it really is delegate focused for a start rather than CSO. There was quite a disconnect between the physical venues of the side events and the CSO village. You know, they were often a lovely park in a village at N4G, further from the main events. So in terms of this is really logistical and planning strategically for us, does anybody have any insights? Is STM going to be similar, or yeah, any insights would be welcome there. And thanks again for organizing this.
Seeing shaking heads. No, Sinead. Maybe it's one we could maybe try to reach out to the food systems hub in FAO, and maybe might get more detail on that.
Yeah, idea. Thanks, Greta. I'll it was just while we were here, and yeah, I mean, for us, it depends on how we support then Malawi, Zambia, and Vietnam in terms of, you know, whether we go and support them that way or how they're going to be disseminating. Because Maurice, we had similar issues for the Zambians. It was all such last minute. It was very difficult for them to really engage meaningfully, I think.
Yeah.
So thanks again.
Yeah. For the last stocktake, I did reach out to the hub in Rome for info, and I did get a response at some stage. So they have a website and they have a contact details there, so it might be worth shooting them a mail to see if you get any intel. Yeah,
will do. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up if there's nothing else. And Breda kind of gave a great suggestion in the chat box if we could maybe have another exchange to discuss in more detail. We'll leave it as it is today, but if there is interest and appetite for further discussions, maybe prior to the Food System Summit, we or others, if other organizations like to, we'd be happy to participate or coordinate with folks. Yeah, the door is open. Judith, do you want to jump in?
Just a quick one. It would be useful to know, or to, I'm sure people around the table will know this, the other discussion processes, preparatory processes going on for FFS and for particularly FFD among both CSOs and the wider community. So it would be good if we could in some way communicate that through DOCUS or through Concern or otherwise, so that we don't just talk within this group, but that we connect to others who are engaged from a different perspective.
Yeah, great. Maybe Simon, we can follow up on that point, maybe through the policy working group with DOCUS and this wider group as well. Maybe link in with IFIAD, Patrice and Charles from IFIAD. Okay.
Lovely.
Super. Thank you so much for your time. We're 7 minutes over. Really apologize for that. But it's fantastic to have all the great speakers and everyone that joined. Special thanks to Paul from Irish Aid. Great to have you here, and the additional information is very welcome. Also thanks for Breda from Eleanor Crook Foundation. A lot of the work that we did around Nutrition for Growth was kindly funded by Eleanor Crook, so great to have that and have her here with us today. But also for all Margarita from Generation Nutrition, Charles from IFIAD, Judith from Public Good, and Tom Ireland as well. So it's been really great. Value your time and your contribution. And as well, Laura Heraty for pulling all this together in very short notice, and Amy Dignan in the background, who's been managing Zoom and PowerPoint flawlessly as always. We'll do notes and the recording link and the slides, and we'll send it out. If there's anything else that we should be doing, or if there's any information that people would like, just shoot us a mail, and yeah, we'll see if we can get to address those. So thanks very much, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.